In this clip, Bishop Barron is explaining the deadly sin of greed. He's going to use the term avarice. It's just important to understand that avarice and greed are the same thing. Let's go ahead and watch what he has to say, and then afterwards I will conclude with some biblical verses from the Old Testament and the New Testament that further provide us profound insights into the nature of greed and its antidote. Check this out.
Avarice, the fifth deadly sin. Here's Thomas Aquinas describing avarice. It's the unreasonable or immoderate desire for riches. Okay? The unreasonable or immoderate desire for riches. We're allowed to own private property. In the Catholic Church's social teaching, we are allowed to own private property. Nothing wrong with wealth in itself. But when it becomes unreasonable or immoderate, we have the deadly sin of avarice. You might say the greedy attachment to material things, that's avarice. There's an old term in the spiritual masters, concupiscence, concupiscencia. It means errant or twisted desire. We can have a concupiscent desire for material things. See, here's an image I want you to play with. Most of us think we're unhappy because we're missing something. Mind you, we're all unhappy, everyone in this room. I don't mean depressed. What I mean is we're all hungry, right? What did Bruce Springsteen say? Everyone's got a hungry heart, right? That's echoing St. Augustine, right? Lord, my heart is restless till it rests in thee. That means I'm always yearning. C.S. Lewis saw the same thing. He called it joy, this deep, searching yearning for a good that I know only inchoately but don't yet possess, right? I can't get no satisfaction, said Mick Jagger. The same thing. There's very great wisdom in that, you know. I try and I try and I try. And here's, when he wrote that song, he was 25? He was at the top of the world, one of the most famous, richest person going. And all the sex, pleasure, money, power you could want, right? And yet he said, I can't get no satisfaction. Good. See, most of us think the reason we're unhappy is there's something missing. I've got to fill up. So, I don't have enough wealth. That's my problem. I don't have enough pleasure. That's my problem. Enough power, enough honor. I got to fill up the empty cage of the ego, and then I'll be happy. Right? Now, fellow sinners, fellow addicts, because it's all a type of addiction, isn't it? We all know it's false, don't we? What alone fills you? And this is the supreme paradox upon which all of Christianity rests at the end of the day. What fills you is not throwing things in the empty cage, but rather giving your life away in love. That's what fills you. Now why? Because see, that is the divine life. That's who God is. Augustine, right? My heart's restless till it rests in you. Well, who are you? You are love. Right through, that's all God is. God gives himself away. Therefore, when we give ourselves away in imitation, we get filled up with the divine life. That's how it works. That's the formula. I've staked my life on it. I'll bet you $1 million it's true. I staked my life on it. It's John Paul, the law of the gift, right? That your being increases in the measure that you give it away. Now, take that to the bank spiritually. Take Gilligan's Island away and take that away today from my talk. Is your being increases in the measure that you give it away. Avarice, and it might be avarice for wealth or for pleasure or for power or for honor, will make you miserable, not happy. Let those things flow through you as a gift to others, and you'll be filled with the divine life. That's the point here. What's the antidote, the lively virtue? Is generosity. God is the opposite of avaricious. God is the one who gives. That's all he does. The Father gives away. That's the Son. The Son gives back. The mutual giving of Father and Son, we call that the Holy Spirit, right? God is a community of self-giving love. The world is meant to imitate him. So generosity is the lively virtue here. Some practical advice. This is hard stuff. I find it hard. But I'll encourage you, and I'll encourage myself at the same time. Especially now during Lent, the remaining weeks of Lent, where we talk about almsgiving as one of the practices of Lent. Give something away now in each of the remaining days of Lent. Find something, you know what it is. I can't tell you what it is, but go into your closet, into your home, into whatever. Give something away now every day for the rest of Lent. One thing that's a really good spiritual exercise, by the way, clean out your closet on a regular basis. I don't mean dust it. I mean, go through your closet. Gosh, when's the last time I wore that shirt? When's the last time I wore those? Do I really need all these pants and shirts and sweater? Priests get a lot of sweaters for some reason. Is that true? We get gifted with sweaters all the time. I think about 30 sweaters in my closet. Well, I mean, and I like 4 or 5 of them that I tend to wear. But there they all are. Gathering dust. Give them away. You know the line from John Chrysostom still takes my breath away. If you've got 2 shirts in your closet, John Chrysostom said, one belongs to you. The other belongs to the man who has no shirt. Let that sink in sometime. Here's Pope Leo XIII in Rerum Novarum, the founding document of the Church's social teaching. He said, once the demands of necessity and propriety have been met in your life, everything else you own belongs to the poor. Now let that sink in. It's stated broadly enough, Once the demands of necessity and propriety have been met in your life, do I have really what I need? And even to have kind of a proper life. Okay, once that's set, everything else you have belongs to the poor. That's Leo XIII, echoed by all the popes, including John Paul II. How about for the rest of Lent? Every time you leave the house, have a little poor box by your door. Every time you leave, you put something in it. Dime, dollar, $10, I don't know what it is. It's up to you. But every time you leave, put something in it to remind you of the poor. Father Scott will be happy to hear this one, but tithing, is an ancient biblical practice. To tithe is to give 10% of your income to, now, the church, to Father Scott, to a charity, whatever you want. But figure your income. I don't know, you make $75,000 a year, you make $100,000 a year, $200,000, whatever it is, take 10% of it. Give that away. Hard? Yeah, it's meant to be.
So to conclude, I basically just want to look at a few Bible verses from the Old and New Testament that provide profound insights and reveal the biblical teaching of avarice or greed. So let's start in the Old Testament. Exodus 20:17 says this, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male servant or his female servant or his ox or his donkey or anything that is not your neighbor." So one of the profound things that we see is that greed leads to coveting and it leads to idolatry. And this is a violation of God's command because it leads us away from right ordered praise back to God and gets us fixated upon other things that are like little gods in the place of worshiping the one true God. Proverbs 11:28 says, "Whoever trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like a green leaf." So there is also an aspect of trust. When we trust in things that are not God, i.e. wealth, and we greedily look after and want to find more wealth, this reveals that we aren't trusting or placing our faith in God. We're placing our faith in worldly things. And again, this is another form of idolatry. So there's the idolatry of actually looking at something and wanting it, and there's also the idolatry of internally trusting in something other than God and therefore not having faith. Proverbs 15:27 says, "Whoever is greedy for unjust gain troubles his own household, but he who hates a bribe will live." Greed leads to personal and familial destruction. Have you ever thought about that? Ecclesiastes 5:10, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity." So greed is insatiable and ultimately meaningless. It leads to wanting and craving more and more, and you seek after it. Let's look at some New Testament passages. Luke 12:15 says, "And he said to him, 'Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions.'" So Jesus directly warns us against greed and materialism and fixating and focusing in on material gains and material accumulation of goods. Matthew 6:24 says, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." So here we get back to this trust issue. Greed competes with God for our allegiance. There is an allegiance that is attached to all forms of idolatry. There is an allegiance that is attached to all forms of wrong praise. We have to let go of these things and put them aside and get everything rightly ordered. I think that's the best way to be thinking about this. And greed, the desire for more and more, avarice, the desire for more and more, that is not a moderate and it's ultimately an all-consuming passion of ours. That preys on the allegiance that we should have with God and Him alone. Ephesians 5:5 says, "For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure, or who is covetous, that is, an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God." This is a deadly sin. Greed is equated with idolatry, and this leads to the exclusion from God's kingdom. This is a very, very big issue, and that's the key point of that verse. Hebrews 13:5, "Keep your life free from the love of money, and be content with what you have, for He has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you." So again, we see the issue of trust here. We need to be content and trusting in God and His provision for our life. Produces faith. Let's just read one more. Mark 8:36 says, "For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul?" You see, greed blinds us to the one eternal thing that we most ultimately need, and that is God. Greed fixates us in the present temporary situation, and it's usually not thinking about the providential and eternal priorities of God for our life. So what we see from greed is that it's idolatrous. It also leads to spiritual and moral destruction, and it leads us away from being content in Christ, content in God. And we as Christians are called to a life of contentment and trust in God's provision. We must do this. It's how we garner faith. It's how we grow in our faith and produce the type of life that God would want us to live. If we do not do that, we are ultimately being greedy, and we are walking farther away into a deterioration unto death when we are being greedy. All right, that's all I have for this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Remember that Christianity is Christ, and without Christ there is no Christianity. See you in the next one. Peace.